It happened. Jesus rose from the dead. He defeated sin and death forever. It happened. The stone was rolled away. Jesus walked out of the tomb, and he lives forever. And now that Easter's over, it's our turn. We have been born again into a new life. We are dead to sin, but alive to God, no longer slaves to this world, but set free to pursue God's righteousness and embrace the gift of eternal life. We have been bought with a high price through Christ's redeeming blood. We have been made temples of God's Spirit, free from condemnation and reconciled to the Father. Though we may struggle here on earth, we press forward to our eternal homeland, walking in faith and with confident hope that the one who began this good work will bring it to completion. Jesus rose and the gates of heaven opened, and that victory alone means that nothing can separate us from God's love. This is why we hope. This is why we worship. This is why we give. This is why we go, pray, baptize, teach, and preach. And we'll never have to do this alone, for Jesus will be with us always until the very end. Easter may be over, but for us, it's also just begun.
Well, hello, McLean Church. Thanks for joining us this week after Easter. And today, we want to keep the conversation going from last weekend. We want to keep exploring some of those big themes we talked about as we celebrated Easter Sunday, focusing especially on this idea of new life or resurrection that God is continually bringing into our experience. How do we see this new life so that we can actually participate in it? You know, spiritual life is really all about seeing. In fact, one of the most common miracles Jesus performs is restoring sight. And maybe that's his way of emphasizing just how important seeing really is. So how do we develop our spiritual eyesight? Well, first, we've got to do a quick bit of review from our Easter sermon. We said on Easter that we all know that life works in seasons. Things come and go. Things begin and end. Things are born and things die. This is a fundamental reality of life, although we have to quickly add it's a reality our culture does its best to deny. Think about it. Everywhere you look, the message is that everything should always be going up and to the right. Your career, your health, your finances, your relationships. The cultural version of life is one long highlight reel with no down moments, no losses, no endings. You see it on Instagram. You know the vibe. But that's not the way life actually works. Seasons come and seasons go. Things start and they stop. Realities are born and realities die. And as we said on Easter Sunday, the life and the experience of Jesus, it embodies this reality. Jesus lives. He has a public ministry. That life begins to wind down on Palm Sunday. And it's finally eliminated by the Roman authorities on Good Friday. Jesus lies in the tomb for 3 days. And yet from that death experience, a new life is brought forth in his resurrection. This is the way reality works. This is the way God works through reality, not just in Jesus, but in all of our lives. God is continuously bringing new life into being. continuously bringing resurrection into our experience. And here's what's important. This work of God, of bringing new life, of bringing resurrection, it's not conditional. It doesn't depend on our ability to earn it or achieve it. It is always happening. The question is, do we have the eyes to see it? Do we have the eyes to see what God is doing? In God's economy, moments of life come to an end. Seasons stop, things die. There are stretches of life when we feel like we're dormant and in the grave, maybe for a few days, maybe for a few weeks, maybe for a few years. But in God's plan, there is always new life to be brought forth. There is always resurrection. To be a follower of Jesus means that we are people who are continuously living into this new resurrection reality which lies before us. And that means we are constantly training and developing our eyes, our hearts, if you will, to see the new life God is creating around us so that we can participate in it. And you know, if my experience of life is reflective of any of the rest of ours, it seems that God is continuously bringing new life and new realities into my experience, but honestly, I often don't have the spiritual eyes to see or perceive those new creations, those resurrection moments. And the problem is, I can't participate in what I don't see. I can't live into a reality I haven't perceived. There's a fascinating story in the Old Testament. That's the first part of the Bible. And many of us learned this story as kids in Sunday school. It's the story of Moses and the burning bush. Here's the background. Moses is being raised in Pharaoh's court in Egypt. He's royalty, a dignitary with access to the most powerful household in the world. But one day he lets his temper get the better of him, and he kills an Egyptian who's mistreating one of the Hebrew slaves. Because of that, he has to flee from Egypt. There's presumably a bounty on his head, and he winds up running away from everything he knows, and he winds up beside a well in a place called Midian. Now, Midian in the ancient Near East is the equivalent of nowhere. It's the outskirts, the desert, the middle of nowhere. The ancient world's equivalent here of getting exiled to some forgotten town where nothing ever happens. In what feels like an overnight experience, Moses goes from being at the very center of the known universe, the courts of Egypt, the most opulent, powerful place in the ancient world. He goes from that to sitting beside a well in Midian, wondering what just happened to his life. Think about what that must feel like. Imagine losing your job, losing your home, losing your reputation and how you're known, all in one day. That's the scope of what Moses is experiencing. Now, as the story continues, Moses meets a woman beside that well in Midian who actually becomes his wife. And her father has sheep, and Moses ends up tending those sheep out in the desert, because remember, Midian is in nowhere. Now, talk about a season of life coming to a crashing end. Again, going from the courts of Pharaoh to tending sheep in the desert outside of Midian. But then one day, as Moses is out with the flock of his father-in-law, whose name is Jethro, he comes to a place called Horeb. Now, Horeb is significant in the Old Testament. It's the mountain also known as Mount Sinai, where the Israelites will later receive the Ten Commandments. It's often called the mountain of God. And Moses comes to the mountain of God and he sees something remarkable. He sees a bush that is on fire, blazing with flames, but it's not being burnt up. It's burning, but it's not being consumed. And if you know the rest of the story, you know that God speaks to Moses out of that fire, out of that burning bush. The bush is ablaze, but it's not consumed. That's how the text reads in Exodus chapter 3. And I think that phrase, the bush ablaze but not consumed, I think that phrase is the ancient author's way of telling us something really important. He's telling us that for Moses, the bush was on fire. But for anyone else just passing by, it looked like an ordinary bush. Moses saw it ablaze with the presence and reality of God, but the casual passerby saw it just a bush. The bush ablaze but not consumed is the author's way of saying Moses had the eyes to see the reality of God in the bush. To everyone else, it was just a plain old shrub. And from the fire of that bush, God speaks. He gives Moses a new calling, a new purpose, a new life. Moses' previous life, being raised in the courts of Egypt, it had come to an abrupt end. He'd spent years beside that well in Midian in kind of living dormancy, not unlike Jesus' 3 days in the tomb. But then God did what God always does. He gave Moses something new. A new life, a new experience, a new calling, resurrection. And honestly, that new life, that new experience, that new calling, it was a better one than Moses had even had before. Moses could live into the new reality God had created, the resurrection experience that God had brought forth, because he had the eyes to see God in the bush, ablaze but not consumed. What's fascinating to me about how the story unfolds is this. It seems to me that two things had to be in place for Moses to actually see God in the bush, to see the bush as a bush of blaze, not just an ordinary shrub. The first was Moses needed space. In Midian, there was space in Moses' life. Not space he had chosen, but space that had been created for him in the desert of Midian, sitting beside a well, wondering what on earth he'd done with his life. There was finally some breathing room. Finally some silence. Finally some emptiness. Silence and emptiness are pretty countercultural to us. We live in a world that's terrified of the emptiness, terrified of the silence. We fill every quiet moment, every commute, every walk, every sitting in the doctor's waiting room, every moment of boredom. We fill it with podcasts, playlists, social media scrolling, anything to avoid sitting with the silence. And yet Moses sees God in the quiet of the desert, the space that was created by God for Moses beside the well in Midian, and that space that had to first feel like loss for Moses was actually the prerequisite for an encounter with God's new life. The second thing that was necessary to Moses was place. Fascinating to me that God doesn't just show up anywhere. He showed up for Moses at Horeb, at the mountain of God, a specific location that Moses had journeyed to. Place matters. In this place, surrounded by space, Moses encounters the new commission, the new calling, the new life that God was bringing forth. So here's a real question we're sitting with. Could part of developing our eyes to see the new life that God is always creating have something to do with first intentionally creating space in our lives, and secondly, identifying places where God most frequently shows up or where we most clearly see God? Throughout Christian history, followers of Jesus have recognized that certain practices and traditions, they help us develop both space and place. They help us develop the spiritual eyes we need to see. These traditions and practices, they help create the space and place we need to recognize the new life God is continually bringing about. And I want for a moment to talk about a couple of those practices and a few of those traditions, because it's really important that we have some practical handles walking away from this talk that we can begin to use to help us see the resurrection life that God is continually producing around us. So, two practices that Christians have routinely engaged in throughout the ages for us to consider. The first is what you're doing right now, participating in a weekly worship service. A regularly scheduled act of community worship. This is one of the most valuable resources available to us every single week, because here's what it does. It sharpens our spiritual seeing. It makes us more in tune with the realities God is creating around us. Think of it almost like putting on glasses when your vision has gotten a bit blurry. And honestly, what an incredible opportunity we have each week, whether it's online or in person. We have available to us a ready-made experience that is designed not to earn credit with God, not to check a box, but designed to sharpen our spiritual focus so that the bushes around us aren't just ordinary bushes anymore, but they're bushes ablaze with the presence of God. Are you taking advantage of this? Are you consistently showing up to these opportunities for worship, not to earn anything, but to enable yourself to see more clearly? A second practice is something Christians have done personally on a daily basis throughout history, and that's taking time to read a portion of the Scriptures or the Bible and saying a short prayer. This can be as simple of practice as picking up something like a one-year Bible or opening up a Bible app on your phone that'll give you a daily passage out of the Bible to read each day, and praying a short, simple prayer like, God, help me see what you're doing in my day today. Maybe it will be more involved or become more involved for you. You might pick up a devotional book or try some journaling or a longer time of reflection and meditation. Maybe your prayers will become longer as you get comfortable talking to God. The point is creating time each day to sharpen our focus on what God is doing. This is why Christians have done this throughout the ages, because they want to step into their day with eyes wide open. And spiritual practices like attending church and daily prayer and Bible reading, they've been enormously effective in the lives of countless followers of Jesus helping them see what God is doing in the world around them. Now, if you want to go deeper with practices like these or learn more about how the spiritual practices help us live as authentic followers of Jesus, check out one of our Practicing the Way courses or small groups. That whole curriculum is designed to help us better understand the historical practices and habits that followers of Jesus have used for centuries to sharpen their awareness of what God is doing around them. Now, alongside those practices, there are also Christian traditions. And these traditions exist to help create space and place at the transitions and milestones of our lives to enable us to recognize where God is at work. And the truth is, He's always and everywhere at work if we can see it. Think for an example about Christian weddings and funerals. What do? They invite God into those special, significant moments of life. A Christian funeral, for example, in particular, does something powerful. It takes one of, if not the hardest human experience, losing someone we love, and it intentionally frames it in the context of resurrection. It puts this experience into the bigger context of what God is doing in and through our lives, and it boldly proclaims this is not the end. That tradition, it sharpens our eyes at a critical moment to see what's really going on here, despite what we feel or think. In 2 weeks, we're going to begin a 4-week series on Christian traditions. It's actually a series that we did last year, and it's so important we want to do it again. We're going to look at 4 very important traditions that have helped Christians pay attention to God's work throughout the ages. One tradition we'll mention quickly here that we won't have time to cover in that upcoming series is the rhythm of the church year. We talked about it a few weeks ago. Advent and Christmas, Lent and Easter, and now, if you may remember from our previous sermon, we're moving into that time of the church year called Pentecost, which begins that season of ordinary time where we live in the life of the Spirit in our everyday lives. These seasons, they create intentional moments throughout the year for us to reflect on both what God has done and on what God is doing. And in reflecting on those things, we become more aware of the work God is doing all around us right now. Now, here's the bottom line. Life is a series of beginnings and endings. Nothing lasts forever, including our present physical experience of life. Seasons don't last forever. Success doesn't last forever. Moments of significance don't last forever, even though our culture often tries to tell us they will if we just do everything right. They don't. But in God's economy, in God's plan, God is always bringing new life from those moments when or where something has died or something has ended or something has stopped. He's always bringing something new from those endings. And that newness doesn't always come or arrive overnight. There's often a period of time in the tomb, and that time is often very difficult and deeply formative. But there is always, always, always resurrection on the other side of the grave. God is always bringing forth new life. And you know what's often true, if not always true, about that new life God brings? It seems to be better and more expansive even than what has ended. Always better and more expansive than what stopped, than what came to an end. Resurrection always happens, and what's ahead is always better. Did a dream die for you? God has a new dream ahead. Did a relationship end? God has a new relationship ahead for you. Did a season of life pass? There's a new season ahead. Did a career end, or did your life plan get derailed? God has a new plan ahead. Did a friend or a loved one die? This is one of the hardest endings of all. If that happened, there's a new life ahead for them. And the hope of resurrection, it means that death is not the final word. Are you dying? We all are. God has a new and better life ahead. There's always something new. There's always something more. New life is always ahead. Resurrection always happens. This is what Easter that we celebrated last weekend confirms and affirms. But the great tragedy in life is this: although God is continuously doing this for us, continuously bringing new life, so often we don't have the spiritual eyes to see the new life God is bringing to be. We see ordinary shrubs when bushes are ablaze all around us. And because we can't see what God is doing, we can't participate in what God is doing. The great invitation to all of us is to sharpen our spiritual focus, sharpen our spiritual seeing, to awaken our spiritual eyesight, to become more in tune with the realities God is producing every day in our lives and in our experience. This was Jesus' invitation to be aware of and live into the kingdom of God. And how do we do that? Spiritual practices and traditions. Engaging in the things that sharpen our seeing. God is always doing something new in our lives. Resurrection is always happening. Are we developing our eyes to see it?